everybody. Today I'm going to show you how I made the animation of this tiger for my intro. We're talking a hand-drawn frame-by-frame animation put together in Photoshop. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll probably recognize this tiger from some of my other art, but this is going to be my first time animating him, and I'm pretty excited about it. Basically, I drew each frame of him moving, similar to how they used to make the old Disney movies, except I put mine together on the computer. So I got this idea a few weeks back, and all I knew was that I wanted a sequence of my tiger running across the screen. There's a particular scene in 101 Dalmatians where the dogs cover themselves with soot and run through the snow. And I absolutely love that scene, and I ended up using that as my reference for this animation. The puppies in that movie are so adorable, and they have this sort of movement that I was looking for. So you might recognize similarities in the style between my tiger and the Dalmatians. I just love that style and all the nostalgia attached to it, and I really wanted to emulate that. If you're new to animation like I am, or if you just want to do little stuff, a little video clip or a GIF, or add moving elements to your art, there are a lot of resources out there. There are some wonderful people on DeviantArt who have drawn running sequences and things like that just for people to use as references. Those people are amazing, and I so appreciate artists who make resources for other artists. Which I guess is a little bit what I wanted to do with this video. I'm pretty much completely self-taught, and a lot of what I know I've just learned from the internet, and I wanted to make this so other people can learn how to do these animations too. So for this animation, I didn't want to overwhelm myself, so I decided to stick with just 10 frames or 10 drawings and then loop them over and over. Typically, the more frames you have, the smoother the animation moves at the end, but 10 was enough for me. Plus, the end result has the look of a frame-by-frame animation, and I quite like that. I started with each frame sketched out, and then I actually took a picture of all 10 of them with my phone. The Google Photo app has this feature where you can select multiple photos and turn them into a GIF, so I just use that like a way to preview it. It's just really fast and easy, and it lets you see the movement and then change the drawings a little without having to like scan them in and really go to all the work of putting them together. That's another reason I didn't show any of my sketching for this. It was just redoing things over and over, and it wouldn't have been fun to watch. So I used a Micron pen for the outline of this, and then watercolor for the stripes. My watercolor set right now is actually a really cheap one. I think I bought it for like $8 at my local craft store. I've been trying to upgrade to some professional level watercolors, but I decided a long time ago not to let that be an excuse to stop me from making art. Professional watercolors are so expensive, and I just haven't bought them all yet. But I've learned you just have to start where you are and work up from there. You can't say, I won't start making art until I buy all these supplies for it. Just use what you have now. That's like my number one advice for artists out there. So after I finished inking and painting everything, I scanned them into Photoshop. Now, the first thing that I do in Photoshop on something like this is change the levels. It just lets you make the whites whiter and the blacks darker, so you can completely get rid of the off-white of the paper you're drawing on, or if there's any sort of texture, if you're using like watercolor paper, changing the levels helps you get rid of that. Because this is a frame-by-frame animation, each of my little tigers needs to be on their own layer. Since I already applied the levels fix, I didn't have to cut them out really precisely, which can be difficult with hand-drawn stuff in Photoshop because the lines just aren't super clean, especially if you've used textured paper. So I just sped this part up so you didn't have to watch me cut out each one individually and put it on its own layer. Of course, cutting it out like this only works here because my background is white. If I was going to be putting them on any kind of scene or any other kind of background, then I would have to cut them out perfectly. After they're on their own layer, Photoshop has this feature called Timeline. A lot of people don't even know Photoshop has this because it's not really an animating program, so you wouldn't have a reason to use it unless you were looking for it. So Timeline is like a second set of layers, and each frame gets its own layer. And when you have a frame on the timeline selected, you need to make the animation layer on the right visible just for that frame. And you'll need to do this for each individual frame. You can also change how quickly you want the timeline to play through the frames by selecting them all and changing the time on the bottom of the frames. The easiest way to mess this up or to mess any of this up, is by changing one of the frames and not all of them. So if you move anything, make sure that you have all of your frames selected. Sometimes you can move the layers between frames and instead of hiding them, and then when you play your animation, one of your frames is out of order, and it can be really frustrating to try to sort it out. This animation only had 10 frames repeated, but I did one once that was like 150 frames, and it was so much to keep track of. And it can get really messy, so it's a good idea to clearly at least number your layers so that they're in order and you know exactly which one you'll be moving next. A lot of this is just trial and error. I've made so many mistakes on this, but you learn from it that way. The stuffed animal that this is based on, you saw at the beginning, he has these really big beanbag paws. So when I was doing my original sketches, after I got the anatomy figured out, I wanted to make sure and think about how his big beanbag paws would be sort of flopping in each frame. Same thing with the tail. I made the tail sort of follow his jumping arc just a little bit behind the rest of his body to make it look natural. I think a real cat or a real tiger's tail would probably be a little bit more stiff than that, since cats use their tails for balance, and I think it makes it look more like a teddy bear when it follows him, which you can see in the final animation. So a little bit more about this tiger. I've always had a lot of teddy bears. I guess they were sort of like my first original characters. I had like 100 of them when I was little, and they all had names and like pretty complex personalities. I'd write books about them all. I guess I just had an active imagination, and teddy bears are just super easy to personify. This tiger's always been my favorite. I actually bought him for myself for Christmas just after I turned 8, and I named him Onomatopoeia because when I was in 2nd grade, that was the biggest word I knew, which sort of fit my personality then. I think I was a little bit of a know-it-all when I was younger, which really makes me cringe now. Anyway, when I moved away from home when I was 18, I thought, I'm gonna be a proper adult now and not take these childish teddy bears with me to college. And I got so homesick. Like, I was physically sick for the first 2 weeks away from home, so my mom mailed me some of my teddy bears. So if you're in your 20s and you still sleep with a teddy bear, it doesn't make you any less of an adult, I promise. A lot of this is just moving each layer a little bit at a time until you get them all lined up so that the animation moves smoothly like you want it to. And here it is. This is the final loop. I added a bit more to it for my opener, but it's all the same basic principles. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video or found it in some way helpful. If you end up using this method to animate something, I would love to see it. Feel free to tag me on Instagram at Jackalope Illustration, and thanks for watching.